Good day everyone, so hope you're all doing really well. In today's video we're going to be talking about the state of Genshin's combat system and exactly what the future direction holds. Now, just to start jumping straight into it, it's very obvious that currently Genshin is focusing on revenue extraction. In other words, they've currently designed a lot of the endgame and systems to encourage you to not only pull or spend for a certain unit, but also to encourage you very strongly to get other limited characters that will work well with that unit. So a very good example of this might be someone like Skirk and Escoffier, someone like Flint and Anefa, someone like Mavruika and Stlali. So these are characters that if you almost get the bundle of them together, they can be incredibly effective, and a lot of the end game content is going to be very specifically tailored towards them. So this is the problem. This is the current state of the game, but it's also highly problematic. So why is it problematic? Well, this is where we need to take a bit of a detour into the history of Genshin. So prior to Fontaine, you had a wonderful era in terms of the endgame in Genshin. Yes, you didn't have as much endgame content, but in between all of the combat events and the Spiral Abyss, you were in a situation where a lot of characters had their meta teams, and these meta teams for each of the different characters were all roughly very effective in beating the Spiral Abyss. In other words, diversity was encouraged. You could beat the Abyss. Yes, sometimes you'll get a bit better or like worse results depending on exactly what the flavor of the day is in terms of the boss in the Spiral Abyss, but for a large period you could really get away with a lot. But currently in Genshin Impact, the Spiral Abyss and the Stygian Onslaught game mode are very tailored in terms of their buffs and in terms of the enemy mechanics to such a degree that the meta teams of yesterday are not as effective anymore. And this is the big thing that I've pointed out on my channel ever since Fontaine released. So you can go back and watch those videos, but what's going to seem like very duh and obvious in hindsight is something that I got a lot of criticism for. So basically, to give you a quick recap, when Fontaine came out, I basically criticized the game for introducing a regional gimmick, that being the Osea and Numa mechanics, and that a lot of the Spiral Abyss enemies could be disabled if you had the correct Fontaine unit. Now, at the time, a lot of people laughed at me and said, well, you know, there's the Coppelius Ice Shield, I just Shangling 1 to 3 it, there you go. No Fontaine unit needed. Kokomi Clan doesn't know what he's talking about, and yet if you look past the detail, if you just ignore the trees and you look at the broader forest or the high level overview, what you would understand is that from that moment on, when they released Fontaine, the direction for the game and the way in which they encouraged you for monetization kind of changed quite a bit. And this then started to accelerate when Natlan came out, where we had enemies that you could only, well, you could still beat them, but it was a lot harder to beat them without the Night Soul mechanic, and a lot of the Natlan units were just straight up power creeping the older units. So this was not just a case of where some mechanics were just changing to favor certain characters against certain enemies, but the gap between the new characters and the old characters was increasing by quite a bit. And this is once again something at the release of Fontaine that I pointed out. I made mention of the fact that there is a bit of power creep, that there is a bit of a gap, and a lot of people said, but Farina, Marachuse, Hunter, enable everyone, you don't know what you're talking about, enabled healers. Yes, it certainly seemed like that, but that was once again looking at a specific detail and missing the fact that some of the gaps in your hyper carry teams at that time versus your current meta teams was starting to widen, and it kept widening. And if you now fast forward to the era of the Luna 1 version, you can see that we've got highly specific mechanics that are related to characters from a specific region, and you've got bosses where you can't just Shangling the, like, well, I think it's that Fatui enemy in in the Stygian Onslaught. You can't just Xiangling one to free it anymore. The crab that's specific for Loma and some of the lunar reactions, you can't Xiangling that boss anymore. What's happened is that a lot of the variety in terms of the different teams that you can use, especially for the Stygian Onslaught and the Spiral Abyss, has been stripped away from you. And unfortunately, this means that rather than having two distinct endgame modes, it's almost just like a doubling up of the endgame, which I don't think is really, really nice. Now, one criticism that you might give to me is to say, well, okay, yes, the game's direction went in this way, but you still have the Imaginarium Theatre for the diversity of teams. But you don't really have it, because the Imaginarium Theatre currently is on a rotational basis with 3 elements, and effectively this means all other elements, barring a couple of special characters, are kind of missing. So it's not like you can have any specific character and their specific meta team being able to just come in and through sheer variety beat the Imaginarium Theatre. No, the Imaginarium Theatre encourages variety in terms of non-meta team comps. In other words, as you can see here on screen, I've got a beautiful little mix of Auroron, Loma, Mualani and Dory, which is it's a bit of a rough team if we're going to be really, really honest. Whatever you might say about it, but that's the point of the Imaginarium Theatre. I'm not using a particular character in their meta team to beat the content in a clever way where through execution and diligent artifact building and game knowledge, I'm able to beat the enemies. No, this is just a complete hodgepodge, and you've also got certain buffs, stage buffs and gimmicks that you can play around with. And this is not really the diversity that we want, especially for players that are a bit more serious about the different teams. I mean, you're not supposed to use Mualani in a kind of quasi hyper bloom setup. I mean, it really is a bit of a joke if we're going to be honest. So it's not that you don't really get variety in that sense, but what Genshin's now done, especially with the new Lunar card expansion as well to the Imaginarium Theatre, is force you to build a wide variety of characters. So once again, whether you're going to pull for the niche units and get a bit of an advantage in Stygian Onslaught, or whether you want to try and go for variety, you are screwed either way by the gacha company. And let me be honest about the Imaginarium Theatre. When you get a good run and all the units line up, it can feel amazing, but it's more often a miss than a hit in terms of the gameplay execution. And something like a roguelike dungeon event, like the Mystic Omnu Chamber that we had in the 2.1 Genshin Impact version. Please go and watch my YouTube videos on that, because it was an amazing time. Something like that, maybe a bit more modernized, would be incredible for encouraging team diversity. In other words, I can take someone like a Kokomi, like a Diluc, like some other characters like Yaemiko. I can put those characters in their meta teams, and all of these meta teams would then have an equal opportunity at that roguelike dungeon event, because guess what? A roguelike dungeon event is all about giving you buffs, altering the gameplay mechanics. So in that sense, you can then truly play with your favorite characters, rather than your favorite characters being on a rotational basis just so that Hoyo can sell a specific bunch of niche or a specific bunch of characters on the current event banner. That really is the state of the game, and I feel like there is some of the magic that has been lost. So rather than encouraging a clever experimentation, you now have a case where the developers are curating the experience. They're almost in a sense dictating how you should play. And I know there will always be the odd Chinese player on Bilibili finding some sort of oversight that the devs haven't thought of, but these are going to become fewer and fewer as the content's going to become more and more tailored towards specific gimmicked characters, and you can't use your old meta teams just because of that widening HP and power creep gap that we've been seeing. So this is something that really discourages me, because I'm someone that I was looking so forward to Loma, to Nilo Bloom teams, only to realize that, yeah, you get a bit of a buff in the Spiral Abyss, but if I just, spend some money instead on Mavrika and Zitlali, I can beat that content even faster than the characters that it was supposed to be designed for. It's crazy. And then I go to Stygian Onslaught with my Siggy Six, Nilo, and Nahida, Kokomi, and Loma, and you expect to do really, really well. Oh well, Psyche, the very crab that you have there in the Stygian Onslaught, it was just precisely the most anti-whale design that you could get. It was all just about understanding that boss's specific mechanics, but then the Fatui boss is the most wailed out boss. It's just, I don't know, it is just so frustrating. It's like you can never win with how you spend in this game, with the characters you pull for. You've got to do what Hoyo wants you to do, and ultimately that for me is just very, very discouraging. But yeah, that is the state of the game. That's where I kind of feel with the combat system. So let me know what you guys think, whether you agree with the thesis or whether you think the game is in a very, very good spot. I think GlaveQ made a very great recent video about the state of why certain people think the game is awesome and other people don't like it. So do check out his video, because I think there are also some amazing insights in that as well. And then from my side, choose the star, and thank you so much for watching. Cheers.